Welcome everyone as you filter in. We're just going to wait just a minute here to let everybody get on in and then we'll get rolling. Okay, so in order to be respectful of everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jen Hill, Extension Program Assistant with the Nebraska Women in Agriculture Program. Women in Ag is excited to partner with the Center for Agricultural Profitability's webinar series, which typically takes place every Thursday at noon Central Time. You can see the upcoming schedule of webinars and find an archive of past recordings at cap.unl.edu. Today is part of a series of webinars featuring speakers and presenters from this year's Nebraska Women in Agriculture Conference held back in February. For the latest news and upcoming events from Women in Ag, please check out our website at wia.unl.edu. According to census data, 70% of U.S. farmland will transfer to the next generation in the next 20 years. But today, many families struggle to keep those farm operations in the family. When it comes to transition planning, there is a close relationship between how well a family communicates and the probability of success. Good communication provides a good foundation and helps to define what the issues are. It is critical to discover the expectations of all family members, as each individual needs to think about and share with the others what they would like to see happen regarding the future ownership and management of the business. To present on successful communication strategies and best practices for transition planning, we are joined by Lisa Quist, Central Regional Vice President for Nationwide's Land as Your Legacy program, which is a division of the Nationwide Retirement Institute. Along with her team in Ohio, Lisa helps farmers, ranchers, and other ag business owners build transition plans with the goal of keeping their family's operation intact and suited to transition to the next generation. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type those into the chat at any time, and then we will go over those questions near the end of the webinar. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with your group this afternoon. I am excited to talk to you today about family harmony. It is such an important topic when we're talking about transition planning. So let's get started. So I work at Nationwide, like Jen said. Nationwide is a huge company. I think we have 30 or 40,000 employees, and I think probably 25 or 30,000 of those are attorneys. So before I open my mouth, I'm required to show you this disclaimer. The short version says I'm not an attorney or a CPA, so I do not give legal or tax advice. We recommend that you work with the appropriate professionals for that. And normally in an introduction, the bio will kind of tell you a little bit about me, but I'm going to build that into my presentation today. So for today, for now, I am Lisa Quist with Nationwide's Land as Your Legacy program. All right. So just a little bit about the Land as Your Legacy program. I promise this is not a big commercial for Nationwide, but just to give you guys a little bit of background. Land as Your Legacy is a program that Nationwide has put together to help farmers and ranchers transition their operations from the current owner generation to the incoming generation. And one thing that we often get asked is, why does Nationwide do this? Why does Nationwide care? Why are they putting so many resources towards this? Well, a lot of people don't know that Nationwide was started by farmers and continues to be run by farmers. We were started in 1926 with a $10,000 loan from the Ohio Farm Bureau. The idea behind starting the company was a way to have the people who lived in rural America have lower car insurance rates than the people who lived in the larger cities. In 1955, we had gotten so large that the insurance commission said we needed to split into two separate companies. But since our inception in 1926, the chairman of our board and over half of our board members have always been active farmers. It's important to Nationwide that we keep agriculture at the heart of what we're doing and in all of the decisions that we're making. So that's part of our board bylaws. Well, in 2010, one of our board members who was farming, running a large farm in Pennsylvania with his brother, and unfortunately, his brother was killed in a farming accident. He came back to the next board meeting and he said, if you had asked me 6 months ago if I had a transition plan in place, I would have told you that I did. We had gone to the attorney. We had our estate plan taken care of. We thought we were done. But now that my brother has passed away, I realized that what we had was an estate plan, not a transition plan. And if I am in this situation, we must have customers that are in this situation. And as the largest risk management company on the property casualty side for farms and ranches in the United States, we need to do something to help out with the situation. So that's where the idea for Land is Your Legacy came from. And we've helped over 1,400 families put a plan in place since our inception in 2011. So at Nationwide, we believe the time is almost always right to put a transition plan in place. Gen 2 and Gen 3, so that incoming generation, whether you're actually the fourth or fifth or sixth generation on the farm, that incoming generation stands to lose the most if this work is not done successfully. So before I go any further, I have a little video for you guys to play. So just one moment.
Hi everyone, it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. here. Carrying on your family's legacy can have a different meaning for each of us. For me, the Earnhardt name and its legacy has always been about family, racing, and taking care of each other. While it is not always easy to carry on a family's legacy, it can be pretty rewarding. If your family owns a farm or ranch and you plan to take it over one day, it's important to have something called a succession plan. That's why the folks at Nationwide built a team called Land as Your Legacy. At no cost, this team will help you and your family build a plan that helps take away some of the worries and uncertainties of carrying on your family's business. Get the conversation started by visiting laylready.com today.
All right. So whether you're a NASCAR farm or not, NASCAR fan or not, you probably recognize Dale Earnhardt Jr. So most people know his father was tragically killed in a racing accident about 20 years ago. What most people don't know is that the Earnhardts also own a large farm, and the field he was standing in front of for that video is actually their family's farm. So it's just another example. We all have stories. If everybody could raise their hand and share their story, we all have stories that we know. If it hasn't happened to us, it's happened to a neighbor, or we've read about it in the news of farms that have some sort of tragedy that happens, and a transition happens at a time when a family is not expecting it. So this is important work, important things that are on all of our minds that we need to be talking about today. So here's my first chapter of my bio, so you can get to know me a little bit and how I've come to be where I am today. I grew up on a small hobby farm in rural Minnesota. It wasn't really an operational farm. We didn't actually generate income from the farm. My dad liked to pretend he was a farmer. So I remember one summer we had like 2 pigs, or one summer we had 2 sheep, or we had a flock of ducks and chickens and turkeys and all kinds of things. I was in 4-H and I raised rabbits. We had a huge garden, just kind of a typical hobby farm in rural Minnesota. When I was 13 years old, my parents decided that it was a really good idea to take this very rural family and move us to a suburb of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So we went from living in the country and having this hobby farm to living in a suburb of the Twin Cities. I actually went to school in downtown St. Paul. I took my driver's test on the streets of St. Paul, and I loved it. I threw off my country roots and I fully invested in city life. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had decided I was going to go to college, study broadcast journalism, move to New York City, and be the next Katie Couric. So that is what I had mapped out for my whole life.
Hi everyone.
And then I met this guy. We met the first day on campus. I was actually dating his best friend the day that we met, but that's a different story for a different presentation. But there was no way I was going to take this country boy and move him to New York City. So my New York City dreams went out the window. We were married in 1993. We moved to the family farm in 1998. We were the 7th generation to run his family farm. It was a 1,200-acre corn and soybean operation in central Minnesota. We were the typical Minnesota farm family. We lived on the family farm in a house that his grandparents had built directly across the sidewalk from my in-laws. So we could actually see each other through our kitchen windows when we were making dinner or washing dishes or whatever. Clearly my New York City dreams went out the window. If you had told me when I was in high school that I was going to meet and marry a farmer and move to the country, I would have fallen off my chair laughing. There's no way that that's what I anticipated for my life, but I loved it. We planted a huge garden every year. I learned how to garden. We homeschooled our kids for a while. I eventually learned how to drive field cultivator and combine and all these things that I would never dreamed when I was, spending my teenage years in the metro area. When we moved to the farm in 1998, it was 780 acres, and we grew that operation to 1,200 acres by about 2010. Important part of the story for you to know is my husband has 9 brothers and sisters. Okay. So in the summer of 2010, there was a tiling project that needed to be done. One of our fields needed the field tile updated. So father-in-law came to us and asked if we'd be willing to fund that project. We were 100% bought into farming. We were all in. This is what we were going to do. It was both of our full-time jobs, our only income. So we said, sure, we would be happy to do this tiling project as a way to show that we're truly bought into this operation. As soon as we have either first right to buy or first right of refusal for that land. We did not think it was financially responsible for us to put $40,000, $50,000 into a piece of land that we didn't have any rights to buy. So we're here today to talk about communication, and we all understand that communication can be very, very challenging. So stay tuned for the rest of the story. The USDA estimates that 20% of US farmland over the next 20 years, 70% of US farmland is going to transition hands. Our window for doing this work is shrinking. The age of producers is getting higher, as we all know, and we really need to be doing this work today. We have found with the families that we've worked with that they understand that they need to meet with the attorney and do the legal piece, and they need to do the financial piece. But what we have found is that the weakest link for most farmers and ranchers is their people skills. When you don't excel at communication, you end up here. So this was the auction that my husband and I had in 2012. So I told you we started the conversation in 2010, and communication can be very, very challenging. Little did we know just how challenging it would become and how quickly it would become that challenging. So remember I said my husband has 9 brothers and sisters. There is no death. My father-in-law is still living today. But all he was willing to do when we had this conversation with him was an I love you will, which is going to divide assets equally among all of his children. He loves all his children equally. He's going to divide his assets equally. So if you do a little bit of simple math, we were running 1,200 acres. That means we would inherit 120 acres, and we would have 1,080 owned by his siblings that we would have to buy out. At that time, land in our area was selling for between $10,000 and $12,000 or sometimes $14,000 an acre. So that's an awful lot of zeros on the balance sheet. And we didn't feel comfortable leaving to chance that none of his 9 siblings or none of his 9 siblings-in-law, because they were all married or had a good idea of who they were going to marry at that point, that none of them would come forward and force a sale or ask us to sell out. So on that cold day in December, we auctioned off our farm equipment and made that choice to walk away from farming. So you can see on that right picture, there is 2 of our 4 children watching everything that they knew get auctioned away. We lost our business, we lost our home, we lost our family support, all in that one day and that one decision. Somebody always asks me when I do this presentation, we have not had any contact with my husband's family since the day of our auction in December of 2012. So my kids have something like 50 or 60 cousins that they have no contact with. So I know these conversations are hard, and I know these conversations are challenging, but nothing is more challenging than making that decision to walk away, losing your family, losing your home, and having to completely rebuild your life. So no matter how challenging it is, please, please, please make sure you're having these conversations so that what happened to us does not happen to you. If there's one thing you take away from my presentation today, it is communicate, communicate, communicate. It's hard, but it's worth it. That day when we drove away, everything that we knew ceased to exist. So we know communication is essential for successful planning. It is normal to have conflicting objectives, but it's crucial to identify those challenges. Making decisions for your operation based on assumption is detrimental to your operation and the future of your operation. So we've got to start with honest communication. And we have found over the years of doing this that how well you communicate directly correlates to how successful your farm will be in this transition process. The most successful farms are the ones that have excellent communication skills and are willing to work on those skills. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to change difficult behaviors. It's not going to end difference of opinion, but it will help you define issues, validate your assumptions, and minimize misunderstandings, which is what we need to do. So we understand good communication is the foundation. Why don't we do it? Why aren't we better at it? To me, I think it all comes down to fear. You can see on my screen, we fear change, we fear conflict, we fear disruption, and there's probably as many reasons to avoid communication as there are people watching this webinar right now. Many times we hear, we just don't know where to start. It's a big process. It's an overwhelming process. We don't know where to start. You need to be able to agree on your purpose. Your farm is a family thing. It's your family business. It's your family operation, but it's also your business, and it needs to be treated that way. I like to say it's important to spend some time and take off your farmer hat and put on your CEO hat, because that's really what you are, is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, and you need to treat it that way. So what do successful businesses do that we can incorporate into our farms? The first thing we recommend is developing a mission statement for your operation. They may feel a little bit awkward to do because we're so used to running these as just our family business. But a mission statement will define what you're doing, who is doing it, and how your organization is conducting itself, and who you're doing that work for. Basically, why does your farm or ranch exist? What are you hoping to give back to your community, to give back to your neighbors by running this farm or ranch? It can help you guide your decisions. Get all the key players in the room and come up with your mission statement. All large corporations have them. Nationwide's is protecting businesses, futures, and families with extraordinary care. That's our mission statement. They're short, they're easy to remember, and they define what you're doing and why you're doing it. So once you've come up with your mission statement, post it somewhere where people can see it. Put it in a prominent place so that you can see it every single day, wherever that may be. If it's the kitchen on your farm, or it's the office, or the milk house, whatever that may be, where that prominent place is that everybody can see it. And then when there's a difficult decision that comes up, you can go back and reference that mission statement to help guide, kind of use it as your North Star to guide those decisions. So, okay, Lisa, great. We're supposed to make this mission statement. How in the world are we supposed to do that? I think the most important change you can make in your operation is, if you have not, start having family meetings. Now, if we were in person, I would ask you to, by show of hands, tell me how many of you already do family meetings. And I will tell you, typically, if I have a room of, say, 100 people, maybe 2 or 3 people raise their hands. That's about the statistic that I see typically. It's not something that I see operations doing very frequently, but I think it's a really important key to being able to do this successfully. And how your family does family meetings can really depend on your operation and your operations needs. I've heard people say anywhere from once a week to once a year. So figure out what works for you. I personally am a fan of about once a month. I think if you're doing it once a week, it's probably more of a, these are the projects we're going to do on the farm this week type meeting rather than a full business meeting. And I'm really looking for you to start having family business meetings where you're really working on the business of your farm. And when you decide to do this, it's going to feel awkward. Okay. I once gave this presentation. I asked people to raise their hand. Who does family meetings? I picked out some young lady who was smiling and seemed friendly. And I said, tell me about your first meeting. She said, oh my goodness, it was so awkward. And I said, well, tell me about your second family meeting. Was it better? And she said, the first one was so awkward, we never did a second one. So you have to expect that this is going to be awkward. You're used to working together. You're used to running your farm together. You are not used to running a formal family meeting. Okay. So I'm not saying it needs to be as formal as a meeting that I might put together at Nationwide, but you do need to take it seriously. Have an agenda that you send out ahead of time so that people show up prepared. Set jobs for people in your family meeting. You're going to have somebody who's in charge of the agenda. You're going to have your secretary. You're going to have somebody who makes sure that you're staying on time and staying on task. And when you set that, to help make this as effective as you possibly can, I really recommend that you mix that up. Okay, so stereotypically, and I hate stereotypes, but stereotypically, dad is going to kind of be the one running the meeting or setting the agenda. And a female, probably mom, is going to be the secretary or the note taker. Swap those roles. All right. So when I can see people in person and I give that, people chuckle, they kind of poke each other. Sometimes I see people roll their eyes at me like there's no way dad's going to take the notes. All right. So dad may not take them. The handwriting's not going to be as pretty. They may not be as detailed. He's not going to use different colored inks for different topics like we as females might do, but he's going to get down the main ideas. And if you really need to, you can go rewrite them later. But just switching those roles around can really change the dynamic of that family meeting. The other recommendation that I make is if you have places where you typically sit at the table, so say you have your family meetings at the kitchen table. First of all, if that's what you do, say it's after breakfast on Monday mornings. Make sure that whoever typically prepares and cleans up that meal is done to a point where they're able to sit down and relax and be fully invested in that meeting before you start the meeting. Because if you start the meeting during breakfast, while again, stereotypically, mom is getting up and filling people's coffee, or mom is getting up and getting more fruit to put on the table, or whatever the case may be, mom's not fully invested in that family meeting, and that's not fair to her. So make sure that you have gotten to that point where whoever that person is, it doesn't have to be mom, but whoever that person is comfortable with where things are at and willing to sit down and be fully invested. And then you need to set some rules. And the number one rule you need to set with these family meetings is that it must be a safe space. Everybody who is part of the operation must know that they can come to these family meetings and they're not going to be teased. They're not going to be yelled at. They're not going to be ridiculed. They're not going to be told that they or their ideas are stupid. Okay, so it's got to be a safe space for this to work. That has to be rule number one that cannot be broken. So family meetings, super important. People will often ask me, who should be involved in the family meetings? And I say, if you're doing it weekly, anybody who's directly involved in that operation, but at least twice a year, every single person in that family should be at the meeting, siblings, in-laws, on-farm siblings, off-farm siblings. Everybody should be there at least twice a year so that everybody's hearing the same information at the same time directly from the people that are running the operation. Then the next rule that needs to be set is we need to get rid of the family gossip. this is really, really hard to do, especially if your family tends to be a family that gossips a lot. If you can imagine, in our family situation, it was mom and dad, my husband and I, his 9 siblings, and their spouses. So that's a lot of people. And if you think about the telephone game that kids play on the playground, dad and my husband would talk. They would come home and talk to my mother-in-law and myself. And then somebody would get on the phone with a sibling, and it would go from sibling to sibling to sibling to sibling to sibling until the point where it got to the last person. And they were really, really upset about something. And they would call us and they'd be really upset. And they'd say, why did you do this? Or why did you do that? And we'd say, well, where did you hear that from? Well, so-and-so heard it from so-and-so who heard it from so-and-so who heard it from whatever. And it wasn't even close to the conversation that had actually taken place. You've got to get rid of the family gossip. And one way to be successful at getting rid of that is by having these family meetings that everybody's included in, so everybody has a chance to ask questions and understand exactly what the operation is doing. I get that this is a really tall challenge to get rid of the family gossip, but I truly believe in my heart that if we were able to stop the family gossip in our family situation, we might still be farming today. I think single-handedly, this is the one thing that really destroyed the relationships and destroyed our chance of being able to continue to farm. And you can reduce the family gossip by making sure those family meetings are a safe space. Now, again, I can't see my audience today, so I can't ask for a show of hands. But this one, we talk about avoiding grudges. And this one is really geared at like the generation 2 or generation 3. So generation 1, typically mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, depending on how your farm is set up, ultimately the final decision is with them. They are the primary owner of those assets. It is ultimately their decision. So you need to make that decision. If you're in generation 2 or generation 3, you need to make the decision today that when the decision doesn't go the way you hope it will, which is going to happen, excuse me, that you're not going to hold a grudge. You're going to understand that the decision was made and you're going to move on. And again, that's a really, really challenging thing to do. But if you have these family meetings established and you have that safe space to be able to present your ideas and give your rationale for why you want to try to do whatever your idea may be, hopefully then you at least have that opportunity to get that out in the open and to understand why the decision is being made that's being made. And sometimes understanding this family business structure can help kind of close that gap, that misunderstanding gap. So whether you acknowledge it or not, all family businesses have these 3 different systems. Number 1 is the management system. Number 2 is the ownership system. And number 3 is the family system. So number 1, management. It's exactly what you would imagine. It's the day-to-day operations of the farm. Do we have enough fuel for the tractors for what we need to be doing? Do we have the feed for the cattle? Do we have seed in time for planting? Whatever the case may be, just the day-to-day management decisions. Number 2 is the ownership system. So this is going to be the majority owner of those assets, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, again, however your farm is structured. That ownership system is concerned with the bottom line. How is the decision that we're making or what you're proposing going to make money for the operation? Or what's the risk? What's the risk of it actually causing us to lose money for this operation? So there's the ownership system. And then there's the family system. So this is your family, everything, right? Your whole family is in on this operation. And typically, mom is kind of the unofficial head of the family system. Again, stereotype, I hate stereotypes, but in this, it's where we go. But mom is mostly concerned about family harmony. Like, we don't care what we do, what decisions are made. Let's just all get along and have Christmas and Easter together, right? So these three systems are in operation, whether you understand it or acknowledge it or not. And you can see how those systems might conflict with each other. The management system maybe wants to grow the operation. Maybe they want to increase the head of cattle, or maybe they want to increase the amount of acres. But the ownership system is going to be looking at, well, how are we going to cash flow that? Or how are we going to make money for that? Or maybe I'm getting ready to slow down. I don't want to take on more debt because I'm getting ready to slow down and I want to be debt free by the time I'm out of farming, whatever that case may be. So just understand that those systems exist. And then we always need to look at the difference between management and family. So if I've got some generation ones on the call, so generation one, you need to make sure that you are treating that incoming generation, generation 2 and 3, like the future CEOs of these operations that they are going to be. There are so many generation 2 and 3 running around rural America being treated more like farmhands than the future owners of the operation. We need to be transitioning the management decisions and the management responsibilities to that next generation and making sure that we're not just transferring assets, but we're transferring knowledge. If we don't transfer the knowledge as well, we're really not setting that next generation up to be as successful as they could be. I like to think about crop insurance. So running a corn and soybean operation in Minnesota, the crop insurance meetings were always so much information in such a short amount of time. If generation 2 is never a part of that conversation, and then something unexpected happens to generation 1 or that primary decision maker, you're really starting at a disadvantage because they have to start at zero. So we need to make sure that we're involving them and starting to pass those decisions off at a rate that everybody's comfortable with. We don't want to do it too fast so that it makes mom and dad uncomfortable, or so fast that it overwhelms generation 2. Like, I don't want any of you to go back to your farms tonight and say, okay, Lisa said we're supposed to transfer the management to you, so it's all yours. Good luck, right? And then generation 2, you need to make sure that you are taking the responsibility and you have some skin in this game. So don't act like the kids on the operation, act like the co-owners. Make sure that you're showing up punctually and that you've got some skin in the game and you're making some sacrifices, whether that's financially or time or what the case may be, to let generation 1 see, I'm serious about this. I want to make sure that mom and dad understand that I'm serious, that this is what I want to be doing for the rest of our life. All right. So then probably the next most common question I get is from generation 2 saying, how in the world do I get generation 1 to relinquish this control? How in the world do we have this conversation? Well, I really turn this back on generation 2 and 3. Even though they come to me frustrated that generation 1 won't have a conversation or won't relinquish the control, I think it's back on generation 2 and 3. Generation 2 and 3, you need to understand that everything in this operation was built by them. This is their everything. There's generational differences we can talk about that talk about work-life balance and dedication to the job. But the basic is generation 1, this is their business, this is their home, this is their livelihood, this is their hobby, this is their whole identity. And if you come at them and say, okay, we need to start talking about transition planning, and you're super forceful about it, what they hear you saying, whatever you're saying, what they hear you saying is, it's time for you to be done and move on. I want you to get out of this business. And that's not going to be successful. That's not going to be an effective way to have that conversation. So make sure that you are understanding what they bring to the table. Don't throw away all of their knowledge just because you want to do this. And generation 1, you need to understand that as you're transferring that management and that those responsibilities, there will be mistakes made. Everybody makes mistakes. But if you go all the way back to the family meetings and you set up those family meetings, and this is the safe space, and this is the opportunity to talk about your ideas, then at least when those mistakes are made, generation 1, you can have the comfort and the confidence to say, yes, but I understand that how the decision was made, why the decision was made, and what the thought process was behind it, to take away a little bit of that sting when a mistake is made. So every single operation out there has a window of opportunity. I don't know what the window looks like for your farm. But for every generation 2 and 3 that's out there, there is a window that will close at some time. I'm not here to encourage anybody that they should close that window. I'm just telling you that's the truth. For our family farm, that window closed in 2012 when we made the decision that it was not financially responsible for us to stay in that operation with no plan in place. And every generation 2 and 3 out there that is farming without a plan in place faces the same thing. How is this financially responsible for us to stay in this operation if we don't know what's going to happen when mom and dad pass away or grandma and grandpa pass away? Generation 2 and 3 have to feel valued, and they have to feel like their opinions are important. Children who know that their opinions are valued are twice as likely to stay with that operation long term. They need to be deeply involved. They need to be able to see their future in that operation. If they don't, they might start looking elsewhere. If you think about it, they're giving up quite a bit to be on that operation and be farming with you. If they had a job in town, they may have a 401k. They would have PTO that's defined, which sometimes doesn't happen on the farm, right? They would have health insurance, maybe a life insurance benefit. There's a lot that they're giving up to be a part of the operation. There's also a huge benefit to being a part of the operation, but they need to be able to see their financial future in your operation. And generation 1, if your goal is for them to continue your legacy and to have your farm or ranch continue on with your children, then forget the windows, throw the door wide open, have this conversation with them, tell them what your plan is. Don't keep them in the dark. Don't wait and say they can figure it out when I'm gone. It can be their problem. I don't need to worry about it. Because if that's your attitude and if that's what you're doing in your operation, you're setting your children up to fail, and you're setting your children up to argue with each other. If the off-farm kids know what the plan is just as well as the on-farm kids do, the chance of there being conflict after you're gone is so much lower. They may be upset. They may not like the decision that you made, either the on-farm kids or the off-farm kids. They may not like the decision that you made. But if you're gone, they're not going to be upset with you. You're gone. They're going to be upset with their siblings because that's just human nature. So make sure this is well planned out and well communicated to everybody that's involved in the operation and everybody in the family. All right, so one more thing to think about. I told you that we lived on the family farm in what we called Grandma's house. So when we moved out to the farm, Grandpa, so my husband's grandpa, had passed away shortly after we started dating. I met him one time, maybe twice, and then met the extended family at his funeral. But Grandma lived for quite a few more years. She had passed away in December of, it would have been 1997. And we moved to the farm in March of 1998 into her house. So she had been gone for a few months. I was largely pregnant with our first child. So we moved in the middle of March and our first baby was born in May. So I was just a few weeks away from delivering our first baby. And what do women do when they're pregnant, ready to deliver, moving into a new home? We nest, right? So I moved into the house and I wanted to make a beautiful home for my new baby that was about to be born. Well, Grandma loved bubblegum pink. I don't love bubblegum pink. All right. I'm more of a sage green girl myself, but I don't love bubblegum pink. So Grandma had bubblegum pink wallpaper, bubblegum pink carpeting, bubblegum pink curtains, and a bubblegum pink toilet and sink and bathtub. So I moved into the house and I started removing the bubblegum pink. I took down the bubblegum pink curtains. I removed the bubblegum pink carpeting. I removed the bubblegum pink wallpaper. Well, what I did not know, what I was not aware of, and nobody told me, was that Grandma and Grandpa, shortly before Grandpa passed away, had celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Grandpa knew how much Grandma loved bubblegum pink. So for their 50th wedding anniversary, Grandpa allowed Grandma to remodel the house. And that's where all the bubblegum pink came from. So in essence, I was removing Grandpa's 50th wedding anniversary gift to Grandma and throwing it away. Okay, so needless to say, some of my in-laws were pretty upset with me for doing that. Now, that had nothing to do with us selling out of farming years later. It just is an example of, I'm not saying you can't remodel your house if you happen to be in the same situation we were in, but it's just an example of making sure that you are very cognizant of family dynamics and things that are sentimental and important to people that, as the in-law coming in, I didn't understand and wasn't aware of. Well, fast forward a little bit, we had a few more kids. We lived out on the farm, and I said my husband had 9 brothers and sisters. They were literally spread all over the world. He had one living in Sweden, one in Australia, all over the place. And they would come home and visit for extended periods of time, because if you're coming from a different country, you come for a long time. And so we would find out when people were coming that everybody's kids were about the same age. And so they would come and they'd stay at, my in-laws, my mother-in-law and father-in-law's house. Their kids were coming to visit their grandma and grandpa. And we understood that the idea was to come and visit grandma and grandpa, but we lived right there, remember, just across the sidewalk. And so if the cousins are there, my kids are going to want to play with them, right? So I would find out that people were coming, and I would go to Walmart and I would buy every age appropriate, season appropriate toy I could possibly afford. I would get kiddie pools in the summer and squirt guns and water balloons and popsicles and all kinds of fun stuff for the summer. And in the winter, I would get sleds and snow block makers and fun hot chocolate supplies, because my husband and I wanted them to know that even though you're coming to visit grandma and grandpa, or our mom and dad, but your kids grandma and grandpa, we welcome you to the farm as the next potential owners of this operation. We want you to know that you are welcome here. We're excited that you're here, and we want you to feel welcome. So just a couple things to keep in mind for those of you who are on farm and you have off-farm siblings. They have great memories of growing up on that farm, and they probably want to expose their families to it and have their family be able to experience it. So just think of ways that you can include them in the farm and operation and welcome them onto the farm. All right, so how do we begin this conversation? When this presentation is over, you are going to be sent a couple of handouts. One is our client guide, which, again, my intention is not for this to be a big nationwide commercial. Obviously, this is a nationwide marketing piece that is going to be sent out to you. But what I want you to do with it is I want you to go to the back inside. It's page 6. You'll see it when you get the handout. There's a list of 21 different topics, transition planning topics. And how I like to use that particular page of this piece is whoever's that generation one, whether that's mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, whoever, 2 brothers farming together, whatever the case may be, give them each a copy of this page 6 of this client guide and have them rank their priorities in order from 1 to 10. So there's 21 options. They're not going to choose them all. They're going to choose their top 10 and they're going to rank them in order. And I want you to have them do it individually, not cheating, not looking at each other's papers, and then compare their list. It can be a great way to start the conversation, because really everybody needs to be on the same page, pulling in the same direction with the same goals before we can be effective at putting a transition plan in place. So that's number 1. The second piece that you're going to get, we call our transition planning readiness questionnaire. So this is going to come out to you after the presentation is over. It's a 16-question questionnaire that all the answers are yes, no, or don't know. Super easy to answer. You can also get to it at laylready.com if you want a digital copy. But again, it's just a way to look and see which topics has your farm completed and has taken care of versus which topics have you either not talked about, you don't know, you haven't made a decision, that still needs some work on as far as this process is concerned. And then when you start working with a transition planner, obviously I'd love for you to work through our program, but there's all kinds of people out there in the world doing this work and doing it very well. So if you want to work with Nationwide, great, I would love that. But just find someone and start working with someone. When you complete the 16-question questionnaire, you can bring that to your first appointment, and it gives them a kind of a snapshot into where your operation is, what you've done, and what you have yet to complete. All right, so thank you very much for your time and attention. I do see there are a few questions that look like they have come in. Here is my contact information. I don't work directly with clients. My job is to manage the program, manage the advisors that are working with the program. But if you're interested, reach out to me and I can connect you with a Land is Your Legacy advisor that is close to you and where you live to come and meet with you and start this process. So thank you very much. And before we move to questions, just a reminder, Jen and Ryan, if we could stop the recording, then we can move